But I'm like curious, who do you listen to? How do you put them all together?
The best thing to do in theory is get them all in a room and let them fight.
Welcome to our series entitled the IAM Podcast, a podcast about innovation, business, and most importantly, people. In this series, we'll be talking to founders, executives, and various experts about their vision, challenges, best practices, and lessons learned throughout their journey. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone. Today, I'm excited. I'm joined by the co-founder and the CEO at Serenno Medical, Tomer Lark. Hello, Tomer.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I'm very excited. How are you?
I am well.
All right.
Fun times here in Serenno.
Fun times. That's very good to hear. And we're very excited to learn more about you, your product, the market, your solution, and of course, your personal journey. Okay, so let's just get started. Take us back to Mass Challenge Israel. So we'd love to hear how you pitched your startup.
Mass Challenge specifically is impact-oriented accelerator. So in that case, obviously, we want to emphasize the benefit for the patient and a lot more, and not emphasize as much the financial structures around taking care of patients. It's not really as important for this for these situations. But we basically have the very same pitch we had since Serenno was started. We are delivering life-saving data to physicians who are keeping ICU patients alive.
Yep. Okay, you mentioned ICU. So how did your product change the current clinical practice or the ICU environment?
Right. So today, in 95% of hospitals worldwide, even the best funded ones, are still monitoring patients' fluid balance and kidney function with a manual mechanical device, requiring the nurse to literally stop by the bedside. Usually it's something like down on the floor, look at a container filled with urine, write down how much urine was produced, usually on the computer, emptying that container and leaving only to come back an hour later and do it again. This is done, again, in 20 million ICU patients worldwide every year, every hour of every day.
Okay. So how did this product impact the nurse, the patient, the hospitals?
So these are three different levels. For the patient, we automate the monitoring of this parameter. So for the patient, they receive 100, maybe even more, 100 times more data than is currently collected. And instead of having one metric per hour, we deliver 1 point of data every few seconds.
Amazing.
That benefits the additional amount of data allows the nursing staff to not only see the kidney function declined after it happens, it allows it to see it before it becomes life-threatening. They are able to see the trend leading to the damage and not the damage after it's done. For the nurse, it's a lot simpler. Now he or she do not have to come by to that thing on the floor and check on that every hour. They can focus on the patient. They can focus on other aspects of their job and do their job much better. And for the hospital, the benefit of automating this parameter and detecting kidney failure and kidney function decline before it becomes a lasting damage for the patient means less time for the patient in the hospital, less expenses to take care of him, and basically allowing them to take in more patients for the same space, allowing them to take better care of the patients and never reach the situation when they have to take care of damage that is caused by the hospitalization process.
This is really amazing. Okay, so yeah, I read in your website like this kidney failure is among the most common and dangerous ICU complications. And it should be detected because it's really difficult, right, when it progresses.
Kidney injury is in many ways irreversible. And also the kidneys are a very smart organ, but they lack any sort of feedback. So when the patient has a heart attack, the patient knows it's easy to detect. But when the kidneys are damaged, they don't have any nerves. They don't alert the brain that there is something wrong. It's hard to see that thing happening. So when we compare the kidneys to a factory, and this factory's job is to take the blood and make it cleaner, so they are the filter for the body. What we do is we look at the chimney of the factory and we see the smoke coming out. And by the amount of smoke coming out of the chimney, we can say if the factory is doing its job properly. And when something changes in the amount of illustrated smoke, we can tell the physicians, you should go and see what has changed, either to the better or for the worse, and allow them to treat this change a lot sooner than they would without our system.
The power of early detection. Okay.
Exactly.
Very, very interesting. Okay. But first, well, talk to us about the very interesting genesis. I think originally you're solving one problem and then one more interesting problem came up. So please talk to us a bit about the backstory here.
So several years ago, before I was even involved in Serenno, a physician in Belgium named Mano Malbrain approached my partner and asked him to solve a problem. He wanted a device to measure intra-abdominal pressure. I will not get into that. It's an interesting, difficult to read parameter that is used in intensive care situations. During the process of developing the solution, we found out that for measuring intra-abdominal pressure, we also need to measure urine output, at least to some extent. And this is basically where I come into the company. Very early, we had basically a napkin drawn, and we had an understanding of how important it is to measure intra-abdominal pressure. And when I started to work with my partner, the company didn't have a name. We didn't know exactly what is more or less important for the physicians. We went out to explore, and we went to meet many physicians, some investors, and we got different answers from different physicians, but more or less the same answer from all the investors. Intra-abdominal pressure is interesting. In some cases, it's important. Some physicians don't know what it is. Some don't know what to do with the information. There wasn't a very strong will to buy this from us. Nobody says, come on in, I need to have this in the hospital beds right now. We got some not very concise answers. But once we mentioned that this also measures urine output, some people's eyes went up. And some people started asking, well, why measure intra-abdominal pressure? You can measure urine outputs. And that basically made us understand that we were wrong. We were very lucky that we are also measure urine output, because no one will fund a company that only measures intra-abdominal pressure.
Very interesting.
So we were lucky enough to understand that quite early, It took us, I would say, 8 months of research while developing the product to understand that our messaging is all wrong. But when we did, everything changed. We started getting into the office of the physician and telling them, this measures urine output in high resolution with no workload and such, and also intra-abdominal pressure. And then they go, well, you know what? Intra-abdominal pressure, I'd love that. I'm good with that. But urine output is what I want at my bedside.
Okay. Urine is the new blood, right? I remember Guy Goldman. Okay. So yeah, your product right there behind you in 2017. So it was created. So please talk to us a bit about that product.
Right. So very, very early on, we wanted to do two things in parallel. One was the technical working model, and the other was the aesthetic, ergonomic, how it would feel to use this device. Mm-hmm. And at any given moment, throughout the development process, I worked with one and the other and one with the other. And every time we got either one a little better and we got feedback. So sometimes it's technical feedback. It can withstand this much and it can do that accurately. And most other times it was, it makes sense for me to connect it that way. And it makes sense for me to have it on the bed in that area and not that area. And this parallel process of making sure that the mechanics, the algorithm, the patents all work together, but at the same time, getting the feedback from the nurses, from the physicians on they want this, this is how they want it to look, this is how they want it to feel, was extremely important. What you see behind me, and I'm guessing not really a podcast, is not even the latest version. The latest version we're going to only show in a couple of months because we are now showing it to physicians and nurses to get their feedback.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And we will look forward to the new look. I mean, yeah. Okay.
Good enough.
Yes. So you mentioned about the product market fit, like you're asking feedback from the nurses and everything. So about that, take us through your product market journey.
Right. Today, there are several other devices that measure urine output. The main one is the manual device down on the floor and the manual process to manage it. No one argues that this has to be replaced. The way that we are going to do this is we're going to start small. The product market fit for us would be to start with a population that we understand their language, we understand their process, and we can talk to them at eye level and understand their needs. And that's, like many other Israeli startups, is the US. So I just came back from the Mass Challenge Roadshow, and I went to Boston, New York, and Philadelphia to show our devices to physicians, to hospitals, and get the sense of how important it is for that specific ICU. We got very positive feedback, and we are going to pilot our devices probably in one or more of these centers soon enough. Mm-hmm. After we actually deploy it in the US, actually get feedback from users, we might change something, we might adapt, we might improve the interface, improve some colors of the system, just to make sure that when we do the launch, it will be exactly how the nurses, physicians, and even the patients need this device to work.
Okay, we are going to ask you more about that Boston, New York journey a bit later. But I want to ask you, Tower, what do you find most interesting or exciting about product management?
My profession is industrial design. I went to school learning industrial design maybe 12, 15 years ago. And my passion in this project is making the device, the solution, that all the people who are going to be engaging with it need. And in many cases, these are contradicting requirements. The nurse wants as much data, but for the least amount of work.
Mm-hmm.
And the physician wants as much data, but they don't really care about the amount of work. And there are a lot of requirements when it comes to regulation, a lot of requirements that comes to preventing infections in the hospital. The people who are doing the maintenance for these devices need to be able to make this device clamp on to the pole in the ICU. So there are many, many different stakeholders that all need to get what they need to get in order for this device to make sense and actually become a solution that not only fits 1 or 2 beds in each ICU, but fits every patient on every ICU bed, every OR bed, and every step-down unit in the world. And this is, for me, the reason that we're doing what we're doing.
Okay, but I'm like curious, who do you listen to? How do you put them all together?
The best thing to do in theory is get them all in a room and let them fight. We can't do that. What we can do is try to understand what is the gravity, what is the weight of every opinion, and what is more important, because there isn't one perfect chair and there isn't one perfect phone, there isn't one perfect device to do what we do. Each territory, each language, each patient population, each specific ICU would have their own specific needs. For us, the job is to understand what is the biggest need, what is the most important thing that we can give without hurting something else. Yeah. So, for instance, the device that actually touches the patient and touches the patient's bodily fluids must be thrown away after use. It is a disposable, single patient use device. So we took extremely special care to separate everything that gets dirty, that touches the patient, from anything else that is electronic. So the disposable is extremely low cost. That is a very easy decision because nobody wants to pay a lot.
Yep.
But there is also some sacrifice, because if we basically separate between the two, then our computer, our brain, our sensors are not touching the patients. So that we are limiting what we can do. So it's always a balancing act between what is good for the device, good for the patient, good for the physician, and what is technically possible and technically low cost enough to make sense.
Okay, yeah, that sounds exciting, but it has a lot of hard work.
I am lucky enough, most of these decisions, most of these solutions were right back on the napkin drawing we started with. We are dealing now with the interface design, with the ergonomic design, with how to make all these parts work together and mesh together well to maintain the low cost and high durability and high accuracy that is required for these ICU units, and not sacrifice anything else. But the big picture concepts that our patents are based upon were already there from the get-go.
Okay, you mentioned about patent. So what are the challenges? I mean, is it with the technical, or is it compliance, standards, or regulations? Could you talk about that?
There isn't one answer. Every one of these things presented its own challenges. So we were lucky enough to have our device in a very simple regulatory path when it comes to the US, but a more complex regulatory path when it comes to Europe and the rest of the world. So it makes a lot of sense for us to basically enjoy the fact that we have a low-hanging fruit in the US with a population that we understand very well. So we are approaching them first. When it comes to patents, again, more lucky than not, my partner has a lot of experience with patents. So we didn't have to engage with patent offices and patent firms to write our patents. We wrote it ourselves. And we only presented them the written paper for review.
Okay. So you mentioned a while ago, you went to Boston, the US, the audience that you understand the most. Okay. About that, how was it? I mean, how was that clinical trial, right?
The clinical trial we did in Israel.
Oh.
We wanted to physically be in the ICU ourselves. And I spent hundreds of hours doing the clinical trial next to our system, next to the patients. I was the body that did the clinical trial. We could have hired someone to do it for us. It would probably be a lot more sleep for me. And at the same time, a lot less learning for me. So we chose to do it ourselves, and we had to manually connect the patient, make sure the physicians know what they're doing, make sure the nurses don't toss this to the trash. We had to troubleshoot, we had to do the logistics. We did it all ourselves, but we learned so much from this process. Now that we are going and showing the devices to hospitals in Boston, to hospitals in New York, I know what the nurses are looking for. And I know what would get them excited. And when I was in New York and I showed the devices to the physicians that are making the decisions around purchasing, well, they were happy enough to have us in the room and showing their devices. But only when I got to the chief nurse, only then did she grab me by the hand and made me walk all the way through the ICU to show this to the entire nursing staff, because they were waiting for this device. And this is basically the difference, because the nurses are the ones who have to monitor this themselves. The physicians only get the printout on the screen. They don't know how difficult it is to actually get the data.
Wow. Okay. It was quite an experience in the US. Okay. So let's go to the personal side. So you're an industrial designer, right? This is your first medical device, right? Designing. Okay.
Sure.
But I'd love you to talk about the interesting endeavors you had too before Serenno Medical. Okay.
I did, yes. So to be a little more clear, I did many projects that has to do with medical devices, but never from the driver's seats.
Mm-hmm.
I was always the contractor to do the design. And in many cases, a company approaches me personally or my design office to do a project, and they already had some work done. They had some PCB already manufactured. They had some prior work that they wrote a patent on. And now, in many cases, I was basically stuck with this square-shaped PCB that had this connection here and that button there. And that basically, in many cases, led to mediocre solutions. Now that I am in the driver's seat and I understand the process that can deliver better results, I separated between the two things. We had one path, a working device that is not necessarily aesthetic, not ergonomic, but it's working. And at the same time, we were developing the nice looking, ergonomic, comfortable, easy to install device that only looks good and basically doesn't do anything. It's just a box. Knowing full well that at some point they're going to come together. Now that other people talk to me about how to do this process, I say never ever commit when you do your clinical trials, when you do your working models. Don't get too attached to the design of the printed circuit board. Don't get too emotional about the mechanical components that make this tick, because you will probably have to throw all this away when you go and connect all the ergonomic, easy to use feedback from the field that you are lacking before you do the clinical trial, before you access the patient and the nurses and the people who install it and the people who use it and the people who package it. There are so many things you don't know that early, and you don't need to commit. But to answer your second question, back when I was very young, I found this amazing sport called ultimate frisbee. And I fell in love with this very esoteric sport. I played for 20 plus years. And when I finished my army service and I finally had some time to, do other things, I decided I'm going to organize ultimate frisbee in the small country of Israel. Before that, there were several teams. There were a few people who connected those teams. And I decided to be the frisbee guy in Israel. I found someone who was also doing something similar, not to specifically ultimate frisbee. And we started teaching gym teachers how to teach frisbee. And we were on TV and we were on, in the paper, and we made a lot of noise. We imported professional equipment. We did this for a number of years. It never actually became profitable. We didn't know a lot about what we were doing, but it was a very good experience on first what not to do when you're trying to make money, but also how to build a community, how some things work and some things don't, how to approach investors. No one ever invested in us, by the way. And how to approach a problem from very different directions. We set up tournaments, we set up teams. We got junior Israeli frisbee players to play with junior Palestinian players in a tournament that is sort of in trouble now due to COVID, but was going on for a number of years. And all this was basically us without any money. So I also learned how to bootstrap.
Oh, so it did not really generate money, but it created you a title like the founding father of the competitive frisbee game.
I hate to say that. There are other people who did that way before I did, but I have some nice things to say. I have got together two couples who are now married with some with children on the frisbee field.
Wow.
I have. When I started, there were less than 10 teams in Israel. Now it's more like 50, and they are going to international tournaments. And, I definitely did a lot, but never ever made any money.
Okay. So you won the Mass Challenge Israel. You got an investment. You received the U.S. National Academy of Medicine Award for Healthy Longevity. I saw it on your LinkedIn. And you headed to New York and Boston for that went to the ICUs and met physicians and investors. You're the frisbee guy. Plus, you have an amazing baby. So you had a lot of accomplishments this year in the time of pandemic, right? Wow, what a fortunate guy. What's next? To you, Tomer, to Serenno Medical.
So we are now basically mass producing the first commercial batch of our systems. We have wonderful partners who are mass producing our devices right now, and we are looking for the first few centers to have commercial deployments of the Serenno system. This is the immediate future. We are always looking for funding. We are now attempting to close our A rounds that would support 2 years of activity. We are also working on another project that I can't really tell you about, but it's going pretty well, for the next generation devices that we will eventually be able to tell you more. And I am, again, having to leave my family and baby and go to Germany to meet potential distributors in just under a month in the Medica event in Germany.
Under a month? Okay.
My wife is very supportive. Thank you. And I'm very, very grateful for her being there throughout this process. She has helped me through very difficult times and some happy times as well.
Wow, that's very sweet. Shout out to your wife.
It is very, very important to find a support system around you. Doing anything that has to do with startups is a roller coaster.
Yes, you move very fast, and I heard from one founder this is very excruciating. So it's really a blessing to have a wife who's supportive. Okay.
It's just critical. Without that, I don't think we would have done as much as we did.
Nice. Okay. Well, time flies very fast, but I have the statement you have to fill. So I am Tomer, your blank founder. So what do you want to be known for?
I am the 0 to 1 guy. I want to make something that doesn't exist and make it into something that exists.
Wow.
So take nothing into something. This is what I am very, very happy to be.
Amazing. You're 0 to 1. You're nothing to something guy, founder. All right. Wow, that's very interesting. And we look forward to you releasing that product in the future. All the best to your journey, your adventure, and all the best to Serenno Medical.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tomer Lark.
This podcast is powered by IAMOps.io. Optimize your cloud infrastructure and CI/CD process with IAMOps.io dedicated DevOps team. Check out www.iamops.io and get a DevOps team now. Make sure to check out www.iamops.io if you want to know more about us. Subscribe to our podcast so you can get notified every time we post a new video. Thank you, and you have a great day.